We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Breakdown on Thursday night of the 2022 NFL Draft, where it's been a great night to be an Ohio State Buckeyes fan because the Buckeyes not only had first-round picks, they had them consecutively in historic fashion and gave Brian Hartline maybe the easiest recruiting pitch of all time moving forward now here with his incredible group that he's had over the last few years. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Andrew Lind. Glad to have you with us tonight for a little bit talking Ohio State receivers. Andrew, it's been a while since the Buckeyes have had first-round selections at wide receiver. Perhaps you could argue there's times where maybe they've had first-round talent. It just hasn't worked out. I think there is, without a sliver of a doubt, that's the deepest and most talented unit right now on the team. And yes, they had a great year last year, but it's maybe more than just a one-year thing. And I know this team's looking forward to the future they've got in that room too. But boy, what a celebration for Garrett Wilson to go number 10 overall. He's a New York Jet. Chris Olave, number 11. He's a New Orleans Saint. And then after that, at number 12, the Lions trade up for former Ohio State Buckeye and former Alabama Crimson Tide wide receiver Jameson Williams.
Yeah, I mentioned this on Twitter tonight too. You know, all Brian Hartline has to really do is just walk into a prospect's living room and say, hey, let's watch this 15 minutes of the 2022 NFL Draft. And, you know, you're going to see, three players who were all in his room in 2020, go back to back to back. And we've only really seen that one time before in Ohio State history. And it happened to be with somebody who, transferred out of the program with Joe Burrow going number 1 in 2020, and then followed by Chase Young and Jeff Okudah after that. So, it's kind of a spectacular feat for that to happen. And then not only that, but then, next year, Ohio State's going to have presumably the number 1 pick or the number 1 wide receiver in the draft and Jackson Smith and Jigba. So, that room is full of talent. And, it's really cool to see that happen all in one night.
I think we're going to spend an awful lot of time talking about Jackson Smith and Jigba this year, and for good reason. The kid is unbelievable. I'm interested to see when it gets to 12 months from now, leading up to the draft, where the conversation is around his size at the NFL level, because he's a very different kind of wide receiver than Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave or some of the other guys that, the Michael Thomases of the world that have come out of Ohio State. But we'll talk about Jackson another time. I want to focus maybe more on the guys that have been picked. Let's start with Garrett Wilson because, the guy – every single time he took the field, he was a human highlight reel. There are so many moments in his career that stand out to me, but his performance, even going back to games against Clemson, really jump off the page at you. I think he is going to be an absolute full-blown star. I think he's the best wide receiver in this draft class. No offense to his teammate. I think Olave is going to have a really nice NFL career. I just think Garrett Wilson is a different kind of special.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think that, Garrett Wilson, all that stuff just comes naturally to him. Whereas I think Chris Olave worked very hard to be the number 11 overall pick in this draft. Whereas Garrett Wilson was, from the time he made that spectacular catch in the Fiesta Bowl against Clemson in late 2019, everybody was like, oh, this is a superstar in the making. And really, he went into a perfect spot. I know that they drafted Zach Wilson last year with their first pick, but then, they don't really have any weapons around him, especially a receiver. They have one receiver who they picked last year out of Ole Miss. I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but I know he only had 600 yards receiving last year as their leading receiver. So, that's an instant influx of talent in that room.
And for the Jets to also, by the way, pick up Sauce Gardner, heck of a first round for them. I also laughed pretty hard when I saw it. I think it was Tom Withers from the Associated Press, who's based out of Northeast Ohio. I think he tweeted something to the effect of Sauce's new nickname is going to be Swass now that he's a New York Jet. I thought that was great. But I agree, man. A really good fit for Garrett Wilson in New York. everything about that situation screams to me that it's going to be a good thing for him. Even if things don't work out at quarterback with the Jets, they are building something that I think is going in the right direction. Obviously they were a good team for a while, kind of a little while ago now at this point, when they were consistently, even in the Mark Sanchez days, like competing for AFC championships. Haven't been that caliber good for the last few years. I just feel like they've got some momentum. Plus, Garrett Wilson, he seems like the kind of kid that can handle the New York market. And there is something to be said for that, because that's a tough market to be a superstar athlete in if you don't play well.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're just looking at the top picks so far and who you're going to give grades to, you have to really maybe analyze these. But just off the cuff, I think the Jets really have had a tremendous draft so far. I mean, Sauce Gardner is probably the number one quarterback. I mean, at least to me, he's the number one cornerback in this draft. So then to get the number one cornerback and the number one wide receiver within the top 10 picks, like, you're not going to do better, very often. And there is one very underrated aspect of Sauce going where he did, because if you think about it, who was his coach last year, or the last 3 years at Cincinnati?
Perry Eliano.
Coach, Perry Eliano. So, there's another Ohio State connection in that aspect that maybe most people aren't realizing.
You mentioned a good night for New York, not just the Jets, not just the Jets, the Giants, picking Kayvon Thibodeau at 5 and turning around a couple picks later and landing Alabama tackle Evan Neal. Gosh, those are two huge pieces the Giants really needed to. Pretty good night to be a football fan in New York. And a pretty good night to be a New Orleans Saints fan, because I think there were a lot of people in that neck of the country that were hearing rumblings that Olave might be the guy. And as the draft kind of took form, Drake London goes relatively early, I guess, at 8. Admittedly, I was a little surprised. I thought Wilson would be the first receiver off the board, but I knew there was, potential that Drake London might be that guy. And he's had a heck of a career at USC, and I think he projects pretty well at the next level. It just became obvious that there was going to be this run on wide receivers, and that there were some loaded wide receivers in this class. But for them to go, essentially 8, 10, 11, 12 was kind of crazy. And for New Orleans to have to move up from 16 to 12 to make sure they got their guy, time will tell if they gave up too much, but they obviously wanted Chris Olave and weren't willing to see if he was going to fall to them.
Yeah, being at 16 at that point was a very tricky spot for them. I know, there was a number of projections, including in the some of them that we ran today, this morning, had Olave going to the Commanders at number 11. So, if they truly had interest in him at that spot, then that would mean that the Saints had to give up quite a bit for them to say, okay, well, we're going to pass on this guy who might be at the top of our board, and trade back a little bit. But really, I mean, from the very beginning, everybody thought that Chris was going to end up in New Orleans, and I think that's a really good spot for him. They obviously don't have the same maybe offensive attack as they did when Drew Brees was there, but Jameis Winston can throw the ball around, and then now he's going to be able to continue to learn from another Ohio State player in Michael Thomas, who was the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL at one point in time, and had all kinds of catches, all kinds of receiving yards, and he has been injured the last 2 years or so, but that's just another connection. And I mean, really, that's one of the more scary offenses in the NFC, if not the whole NFL.
Yeah, and if things don't work out with Jameis Winston, what quarterback doesn't want to go out there and throw to Chris Olave and Michael Thomas? I mean, it seems like an easy recruiting pitch to a potential quarterback if things go south with Winston. Definitely a weird period for that franchise, right? I mean, Drew Brees leaves, retires, and then they get essentially one more year, and Sean Payton decides to hang it up. I don't know if that surprised people in New Orleans. Certainly surprised people outside of New Orleans that all of a sudden Sean Payton just said, "Hey, enough's enough." So look, they're retooling, but they've got a lot of good pieces in place. They're a good team. And for Olave to now team up with Michael Thomas when he is fully healthy, that is going to be a scary offense for sure.
And if you remember too, their roster, he's now the 7th Buckeye on that roster. You have Nick Van Nett, you have Pete Werner, Jalen Holmes, Marshawn Lattimore, Bradley Roby. So, and then obviously Thomas, so that makes 7. So, there's a lot of familiarity there. And, there's a reason that everybody calls them the New Orleans Buckeyes. So, it's going to continue to be that way.
Looking forward to following them for sure. By the way, I don't want to go any further in case you're listening to this after the fact. You can watch live with us on YouTube. We always stream our podcast live. So please be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode of Buckeye Breakdown. But we're also available after the fact if you didn't catch us live in lots of places where you find your favorite podcasts. The Lions then all of a sudden trade up 12. And, it just kind of had that sneaking feeling of after Wilson and Olave went, you start thinking quickly, who could they want to trade up for that they're worried, might fall or that wouldn't fall to them. I've tried really hard, and I know a lot of people have tried this. I've tried really hard not to be on Twitter throughout the night because I think the NFL draft is one of the coolest events on television. It's truly a made-for-TV event. And I just like watching the drama unfold in front of me live on TV rather than finding out the picks ahead of time on Twitter. So I don't know exactly what the Twitter sphere was looking like after Wilson and Olave got picked. I mean, I tweeted a couple of things when they went out, but I really didn't look through my timeline. But for then Jameson Williams, who, look, I mean, I know he said some things about I'm not a Buckeye anymore. I'm an Alabama guy. And I respect that. That's fine. He did what kids are now allowed to and able, willing and able to do, and transfer and go make your opportunity somewhere else, make the most of it and see what happens. And it obviously worked out pretty well for him because he was having a little bit of a hard time getting consistent opportunities on the field, goes to Alabama, and now he's a number 12 overall pick in the draft. Gosh, that was pretty awesome. And, if you're Brian Hartline, I don't know where Coach Hartline's watching the draft, but I would have been sitting at home with a pretty stiff cocktail if I were Brian tonight.
I would imagine he's out there with them,
Yeah, I would think so.
What the situation is. But, I think just going back to when he announced that he was transferring, part of the ill will maybe that he has toward Ohio State, at least Ohio State fans, is like you kind of see with anybody who enters the transfer portal at this point in time. People are like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal, this and that. And I said at the time, the very day that he entered the portal, I shared a picture of him tackling Devonta Smith in the national championship last year. And I said who Jameson Williams was, who Jameson Williams is. And sure enough, a year later, he's a Bolitnikoff finalist, a first-round pick like Devonta Smith. And, he proved that he was good enough. It just happened to be that he was, competing with Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, like we said, is going to be a first-round pick next year for one spot. And, it just happens. And really, if you think about it, it worked out for both parties involved because they got the best. He went on to be a star somewhere. Jackson Smith and Jigba then went on to set all kinds of records in the Rose Bowl. So it's like it really worked out for everybody involved.
It definitely did. And we're in this age and era now of college football where you're going to see guys leave your program. Think about the number of guys that have left Ohio State or entered the transfer portal, I should say, at least now this year, compared to like the last 3 years combined. I mean, it's way, way more than what we are used to seeing. But it's just the changing nature of the game. And Jameson Williams is probably example, or I should say exhibit 1A of why it works. He just made a crap load of money tonight, and he had a heck of a career. And I know it ended on a sour note with a tough injury at Alabama, but the guy chose to go to Ohio State out of high school because he wanted to be an NFL wide receiver. Brian Hartline has been preaching a vision to these guys, and it's working. And while it took him on a slightly diverted path, he accomplished his goal. And that's something that both the Buckeyes and Jameson Williams, I think, would hang their hat on.
And I think that's something we can't forget too, because he was in the program for 3 years. It's not as if he was just, not learning anything. So, I mean, Brian Hartline can take credit for his development. And I think that that's a very important thing too, because he helped, you're kind of the sum of all the things that happened to you in the past. And when he's in the program for 3 years, learns all these different things from him, and then he's going to go and apply it when he's wide receiver number 1. well, it's going to work out because you've been taught the right way. So, I just look at it like the same thing with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was in the program for 3 years, left. It's you're still a Buckeye regardless of where you finish your career. And I think Ohio State fans and Brian Hartline and Ryan Day and even Zach Smith and Urban Meyer should take credit for what transpired tonight.
It's awfully cool. I think there were a lot of people that expected Garrett Wilson to be a high pick. I think there were people that were kind of wondering exactly where Chris Olave might fall, expecting that Jameson Williams was going to get picked in the first round for sure, but you never really know until it actually plays out how things are going to go. But there's some pretty cool serendipity for those three guys to get picked consecutively, and for an awful lot of Ohio State highlights to be shown on TV, for Ryan Day to be at the draft and be on national TV earlier today. It just continues to be one heck of an advertisement for what Ohio State football is, for the best and youngest talent in the country. And certainly looks like next fall is going to be more of the same with a lot of these guys that are, lined up and looking at what happened tonight thinking, hey, it's my time now.
Well, and it's really cool too. If you look, you can pull up the list of all the Ohio State, draftees over the years on Wikipedia, just a long list of hundreds of names. But the one really cool thing is if you look more in the last 10 or so years, you see players who went from being, aside from the year that Ohio State had like 14 picks, I believe it was 2004. Between that time, like toward the end of Tressel's years, most of the draft picks were second, third, fourth, fifth round picks. And now it's very top heavy. You're constantly having, numerous first round picks. And it's kind of it really shows the amount of talent that Ohio State's bringing in, continuing to produce, and then sending to the NFL. And like you said, it really is, like tonight is nothing but a 30-minute infomercial on what it means to be an Ohio State wide receiver. So, yeah, I mean, it is really cool to see.
Here's the list of Ohio State wide receivers that have been drafted in the first round in the history of the draft. It goes back to 1995 when Joey Gallery, of course, was taken number 8 overall by Seattle. Next was Terry Glenn the following year, drafted by New England. A few years later, Arizona drafted David Boston in 1999. 5 years after that, of course, Michael Jenkins to Atlanta. Santonio Holmes in 2006, drafted by Pittsburgh. In 2007, a couple guys drafted. Of course, Anthony Gonzalez was drafted second after Ted Ginn Jr. was picked 7th overall. Gonzalez went number 32 to Indianapolis and had an incredible rookie season. Ted Ginn obviously had a great career and just recently retired. And then Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson now in 2022 and Jameson Williams. It's a list of guys that you look back on and think, gee, I don't think there's really anybody on that list that had a bad NFL career. Certainly seems to bode pretty well for Olave and Wilson and Williams here and the guys to come.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of crazy to just say, okay, well, it's been 15 years since Ted Ginn and Anthony Gonzalez got drafted. Like that seems like just yesterday, but that really is a long time. And then if you kind of just look at it and say, okay, well, they had 2, technically 3 this year. Jackson's going to go definitely in the top or in the first round next year. Maybe Julian Fleming if he puts together, a really good year, because really Jameson is an example of that. You put together one really good year and you're a first round draft pick. And then, the year after that, Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, it's kind of one of those things that we go from talking about this long drought to maybe it's like 3 years in a row that they have 2 wide receivers drafted, like in the first round. So, yeah, it'll be pretty crazy to watch.
Pretty good time to be CJ Stroud, huh? Not too bad. Not too bad. Hey, before we wrap up for the night tonight, let's look ahead here with what could be to come for the Buckeyes. You've certainly got a handful of guys that we expect are going to get drafted. Hard to really know for sure, but is it Ruckert? Is it NPF? Is it Thayer Munford? One of those 3 probably would be the next one off the board. I guess I'm kind of expecting at least one of them to get picked before the end of the day tomorrow, but it gets really choppy when you're starting to project out where guys are 2nd, 3rd, 4th round.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the MPF will probably go maybe late 2nd, early 3rd, to just a team that needs, offensive line help really. And I mean, maybe it's not immediate offensive line help because I don't know that he's necessarily someone who's going to step in and be a starter in year one, but he could develop into that. So, I mean, me personally, I've seen a lot of actually projections of like the Raiders with their first pick, maybe moving up and picking him. I know the Browns were.
You were looking at Raiders projections? I don't believe it.
No. Yeah. So, and then I think like Rucker, on the other hand, I've seen a couple to the Browns, even to the Jets in the third round, which, I mean, he grew up a Jets fan, so that would be really cool. And then him and Garrett being reunited as well. So, I think that those are really two possibilities for tomorrow. And then I think it would be Tyreek Smith, Haskell Garrett, and Thayer Mumford probably on day 3, maybe in the 5th to 6th round range, I would presume. And then, Master Teague could sneak into the 7th round, maybe just based upon his athleticism and just, maybe testing numbers. But we'll kind of see how that plays out.
Looking forward to seeing it along the way, how it goes here the next couple of days. BuckeyesNow.com is your home for everything that's going on with Ohio State football. We'll let you know, and we'll certainly provide our analysis along the way when all of these things happen in real time. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for joining us tonight on Buckeye Breakdown. You can follow us on social media at BuckeyesNowSI on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, BuckeyesNow.com, and we sure would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel as well so that we can continue to do content just like this for you. Ohio State with a big night. Picks 10, 11, and 12 overall. Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jameson Williams on their way to the NFL. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here.
Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.